Good morning, everybody. For those of you who, well, actually, good morning, good afternoon, and also good night for some people. Heijin is joining us from South Korea, and it's 1 a.m., which is wild. So hello, if we've not met before, my name is Maggie. I'm the Community Product Manager for DataHub, and super excited to walk you all through what we've been up to over the past few weeks. So I'll get my screen sharing here. All right. So we have a good amount to go through. As always, we'll do some roadmap updates. Shirshanka and I will go through some of our recent release details. We have a release coming up that we want to walk through. We're joined by Ray from Jumio. We'll hear about their adoption story of DataHub. John is going to walk us through some kind of advanced approaches to data debugging within DataHub. And then Heijin is going to walk us through some recent API docs improvements. So we're making it easier and easier to get started with our API. And we'll see some improvements to search and an idea of what is coming up in the near future. So as always, we take some time to kind of reflect on how the community has grown over the past few weeks. We're just over 6,700 people in the Slack community. As always, we continue to see just like a really lively conversation happening there. We have exactly, this is the second time this has happened. In the past 4 weeks, we had exactly 1,000 weekly active users. I promise I didn't make up that number. It's the second time we've had precisely 1,000. I don't get it, but it is what it is. But 6,800 messages posted. Of course, the conversation is always very lively in there. So as always, we're continuing to see a huge influx of new members and just a ton of activity in our community. We do take a look at our GitHub activity. So we saw a big spike in PRs coming through in the last 2 weeks. I know the core team is hard at work trying to move through those at a very at a rapid of pace as is possible. So we saw an average of 69 new PRs in the past 4 weeks. An average of 69 new PRs per week in the last 4 weeks. And I always like to remind folks that if you're able to, jump in and provide support to others in the DataHub community. This just brings up a lot of bandwidth for the core team to make sure that we're shipping features, also moving through PRs from community contributors. So if you're able to jump in and provide support, we are always super, super appreciative of that. We did see a slight decline in the number of support requests that came in on a weekly basis. So we saw around 600 per week, which is a dip, but it's still 600 support messages per week. So it's still a super high volume of conversations that are happening in our support channels. Quick reminder, we have Data Council happening next week. So we have a ton of events related to the DataHub community. We're hosting a happy hour alongside the Great Expectations team and Astronomer. So this QR code, if you are in the Austin area, even if you're not coming to Data Council, if you're in the Austin area, we'd love to see you there. The QR code will take you to the RSVP. We'll actually give you a voucher towards your Uber ride if you're coming from the conference center. And then Paul and I are hosting a hands-on workshop to get people up and running with DataHub. And I'm speaking alongside Kyle Eaton from the Great Expectations community to talk about open source partnerships. So great talk happening there. And last but not least, I got to give a big shout out to our guy, Shirshanka. He's given a keynote on day one, first talk of the day of the conference. He's going to be speaking about building a control plane for data. I'm personally super excited for this talk. And also, this is Shirshanka's second keynote of the year. Hello, kicking it off. We're going strong in the conference scene in 2023. So
no pressure,
no pressure, none. Just kicking off a 3-day conference, no big deal. So yeah, if you're in Austin, come join us. We'd love to hang out with you. Also, I'm very excited to announce that the Acryl Data team is welcoming 3 new engineers to our team. So you will likely start seeing these folks in the community interacting with you more. So we have Indy, Andrew, and Kevin joining. Really exciting to have the Acryl team growing and also, just have these folks hanging out with us. So welcome to the team, guys. All right. My favorite time of town hall every time is our community shout outs. We have an awesome community of people who are going above and beyond to help us out. We have a new blog post to check out from Ada. Ada's on the team over at Notion. She spoke at a town hall recently, if you had joined that one. But this is a great walkthrough of how she's using DataHub to automate propagation between DataHub and DBT. Definitely recommend checking that out. And then, of course, we like to give a shout out to folks who are stepping up to provide community support. Like I said, this is so helpful for us to make sure that we can keep the momentum towards our roadmap, and just, kind of provide support to folks as they're trickling into the community. So massive shout out to all of these folks. Thank you for going above and beyond to step in and help out. One thing we're going to be doing in the next month or so is rolling out something called the DataHub Community Council. As the community grows, we're really trying to find experimental ways or exploratory ways to engage the community, to really make sure that we have a robust support system or support network within the community, but also kind of one-on-one or just more closely partnering with folks who are super excited about DataHub, want to give us feedback on how we can make the community better, how we can make the project better. So we're going to be teaming up with folks to kind of keep up with all the momentum we have here. So the ways that we're looking to collaborate with folks here more closely is kind of providing that support system within the community itself, but then also partnering with us to test out upcoming releases. We'll have more expert panel conversations with the core data team. And then we'll also have a forum where we can all come together on a quarterly basis to talk about what's happening in the community, what's happening in the project, and how do we scale and make this a really vibrant and thriving space. So what you'll get in return there is direct access to collaborate with the team. So we'll have a really close partnership there. And you'll have a really strong influence on what our open source roadmap looks like, how we prioritize stuff. And as always, because I am a sucker for custom swag, we'll make sure that we have a strong swag showing there. So more information to come here, but just keep an eye out. I'll be announcing it within the community in April. All right, let's talk Q1 roadmap. Whoops. So from the user experience side of things, Brittanie and I are currently going through discovery to improve our browse experience. We'll get a little bit of a sneak peek there of some of the work that we have in store. Subscriptions and Slack notifications is currently in testing. We're partnering with some of our design partners there. We don't have a concrete timeline on when we'll roll that out, but we'll keep you posted once we do have that timeline. In terms of ingestion, we're actually partnering with the folks over at Fivetran to build out a really strong integration there, so more to come there. And then we just have some discovery around earned casing and improved error reporting. We've made some small progress here and there, but just wanted you all to know that we are working through both the design and kind of chipping away at some of the improvements there. In terms of developer experience, I'm going to hand this one over to Shirshanka.
Cool. Yeah, there's a couple of things that we wanted to hit this quarter. The first was having a tag and term propagation action out to you all. This basically will allow you to propagate tags and terms between entities that are connected via lineage all the way into your downstream warehouses like Snowflake. So a PR for that is open, and I'll walk you through that really quickly on the next slide. There's a big slew of improvements to search that have happened. If you've been paying attention to the PRs, a ton of work has happened in making search much more reliable, much more explainable, supporting pagination over a large number of entities, improvements in autocomplete. We're really excited to have finally kind of finished our list of broken glass in a way of search capabilities, and we're feeling really good about our ability to scale to really large number of entities, as well as explain every single search result at a pretty detailed level. So that's been merged fully in, and it'll be part of the new release. The other thing that was also kind of a commitment to the community was working on schemas as a top-level entity. So as of this morning, there is a PR open that includes model changes for creating schemas as a top-level entity. You might have noticed that we already have support for Avro and Protobuf and now JSON schemas for just schemas within data sets. So that support is already merged in. There'll probably be a very small PR coming on the heels of this that adds support for those sources to produce schemas as top-level entities themselves. So that's kind of coming up. And then finally, the schema registry itself is in flight. So there's a couple of PRs that are still work in progress. We expect to kind of close those out over the next few weeks. Probably, I would say end of April is where you'd probably see the schema registry showing up in the DataHub capabilities list. And just kind of giving you further detail on the tags and terms, the PR is open on the actions repo, and it gives three kinds of actions. The first is a tag sync or a tag propagation action. So that propagates tags across your entities. The second is a glossary term propagation action that propagates terms across entities. It actually takes into account whether the term is directly or indirectly linked to the term that you want propagated. So for example, if you have a term called email that is attached to a column and you want to propagate all terms that are of type or is a sensitive term or a confidential term, it'll take that into account and propagate them over. And finally, there's a snowflake propagation action additionally added on to this, which allows you to take these tags and then propagate them into Snowflake directly. So for people who know, Snowflake itself has a pretty comprehensive tag-based masking and other kinds of capabilities that they offer on the platform. So with this now, you can essentially attach tags to Snowflake tables on DataHub and then have those tags propagate into Snowflake so that you're getting all of the benefits of Snowflake's own data management capabilities by having these tags show up autonomously or automatically in Snowflake from DataHub. So that's what we have on the roadmap updates.
Alrighty. So in terms of recent releases, it's actually been it's been a little while since we've cut a release, and we are currently prepping a release for I think it should come out by the end of this week. So what I'm going to walk through here is actually a summary of what's to come. We do not have the release cut and ready for you just yet, but we'll keep folks posted. But just in the past 4 weeks, we've merged 285 PRs. Are you kidding me? That is outstanding. I was going through the commit log, and it's a dizzying amount of activity in this repo. On top of that, we had 20 first-time contributors, which is outstanding. Almost half of our contributors were doing so for the first time in the past month. So I'm continually very, very impressed by the velocity of this community, and nonstop thrilled to see how many new people are jumping in to help us out. So huge shout out there. In terms of what's to come in this release, from the user experience side, if you were in Town Hall or if you saw Town Hall in February, we are rolling out a new, or this includes the new queries tab, where we're surfacing not only just kind of top queries that have been executed from our system logs, but you can actually go into the UI and manually add a query, also add annotation around it, so to provide context for folks about what it represents or how it should be used. So if you want to see a demo of that, John put together a great demo in our last town hall that's available on our YouTube. We also had a community-led contribution to enhance some of the glossary term relationships. So we used to have, within the UI, you used to be able to see a glossary term inherits or contains, and now you can see kind of the opposite relationship of where that glossary term is inherited by or contained by something else. For folks that have very large instances of DataHub, there were some persistent issues of downloading entities to CSV. We have since resolved that, so you should be able to download a CSV regardless of the volume of entities you're trying to extract there. For developer experience, Shirshanka, do you want to speak to this one?
Sure. Yeah, I think we have a few improvements on top of stuff I already talked about, right? JSON schema source, we now have it. Neo4j is a graph database that some people use as the backend for DataHub. It's not something that we see used widely, but it is a pluggable backend that we support. And so we had a really great PR come in that adds support for time-based filtering on lineage, which was a new capability we added for the Elasticsearch-based backend recently. So that came in. The timeline API, which is used for essentially being able to look back at the history of schemas and data sets in general, now also supports glossary terms. So now you can actually look at the history of a glossary term, how it changed over time. And finally, some small changes were made to improve the startup time for the DataHub CLI. So it starts up much sooner now than it used to before. Big shout out to the team that's pushing forward docs and guides, that Heijin, Paul, and Maggie, and the rest of the team. But really, these folks are leading the charge on that. We've got a lot of improvements to understand DataHub APIs at a glance, table of contents, new guides, and I think we'll see a little bit of that today. Mm-hmm. And finally, search improvements, lots of search improvements across the board. We've added targeted caching in a few places to make that page responsivity extremely fast and delightful. So this new release is going to feel much snappier and will actually be extremely robust at high scale is kind of what we're looking for. That's pretty much it. And then on the ingestion side, lots and lots of improvements. So BigQuery and Power BI have had the biggest lifts this release, improvements to memory usage. We did some framework level improvements to actually support off-memory storage during ingestion. So we're able to actually do large audit log ingestions and aggregations and things like that without actually stressing the memory of the ingestion system itself. So that leads to, and those benefits will show up across all of the connectors over time. BigQuery is the first one that's getting it. Power BI, we've had a lot of improvements in lineage extraction, entity descriptions, things like that, and a host of improvements to all of the other connectors. And I'll not read through it, but pretty much every important connector went through some improvement or the other.
All right. One thing I want to call out here, Paul Logan on my team put together a new kind of like one-stop shop integrations page to understand at a glance all the different systems that DataHub integrates with. So this is now, you'll see this on our homepage. There's a new integrations tab up here. You can search across, it searches across all of the different sources that we support. You can also filter based off of push, pull, different platform types. So, BI tool, orchestration tool, database, etc. So take a look there. We're hoping to make this. The goal is to make it much more accessible to understand, all the ways that you can integrate with DataHub. So huge shout out to Paul. He took the lead on that one and push that together or pull that together in a matter of a couple weeks. So it was pretty awesome there. Okay, that is it for our community update, roadmap update. I'm going to hand it over to Ray. Ray is joining us from Jumio. So I will stop sharing. And Ray, you should be able to share from your side.
Let me give it a try here. Okay, are you seeing my presentation?
Yep, you're good to go.
Great. Well, thanks, Maggie and DataHub team for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I will just dive right in here. Agenda, a little bit about Jumio, sort of the obligatory kind of thing, and then get into mostly why are we using DataHub, how we're using it, and some of the adoption and future state kind of discussion. So briefly about me, I've been at Jumio just about 2 years. It'll be 2 years in May, but been doing this quite a while, about 30 years, more than 30 years as a professional engineer, mostly doing back-end stuff and enterprise software. And I've done everything from, handful of individuals at a startup to multinationals like HP with hundreds of thousands of people. And for those of you who know University of California, Santa Cruz, I'm a banana slug, and my degree is in computer science. So most of what I've been doing in my career, as it turns out, has to do with fraud prevention, and that's no different at Jumio. What we do is fraud and compliance, things like anti-money laundering across the life cycle. And it's extremely important to obviously do fraud prevention, but you also want to try and do that with a good user experience, particularly on the onboarding side of things, because conversion is important. But there's been a lot of stuff in the news about fake accounts and all these kinds of things. You don't want bad actors getting into your system as well. And so to do so, obviously it's pretty complex, and there's a lot of different checks that you can do and a lot of different data sources out there. Each one of these different kinds of sources actually could be a separate company. Some do multiple, provide multiple of these databases at the same, from the same company, but a lot of these are different, or you can have different vendors of the same thing. So trying to stitch this all together, obviously yourself, to do onboarding is and fraud prevention is expensive, costly, a lot of different problems that you could have there. And of course, that's where Jumio comes in. And we have our no-code orchestration platform that pulls together all of these data sources and includes that with our own AI and machine learning and APIs to help you prevent the fraud and compliance challenges that people have. So, to date, over 1 billion transactions and supporting 200 different companies. So countries, obviously, if you're talking about fraud prevention and onboarding and identity verification, there's different types of documents and proof, in addition to just doing selfies, being able to scan passports or driver's licenses or other national identity cards. And you can just imagine how many different types there are for all the different countries and states within countries. And so being able to do that analysis and data extraction from all these different sources is obviously a pretty challenging, complex task. We've actually hit last year a milestone, which was over $200 million in bookings. And while the company is headquartered in Silicon Valley in Palo Alto, the company is also a global company with engineering offices around the world, Vienna, Bangalore, Montreal, and a good chunk of distributed workforce. So I actually am joining you from Seattle. Even though I've spent most of my life in California, I moved to Seattle a little over a year ago. Some people call me crazy, but I'm enjoying it so far. So just moving on now to why we're here and why did Jumio go to DataHub? So we have a lot of challenges at Jumio. The machine learning stuff that we've done is actually relatively new. Given the overall history of Jumio of around 10 years, the machine learning aspects have only been around for about 4 years or so, predates me, but it was sort of an add-on, if you will, and not just related to machine learning, but there's a lot of productivity challenges, just data discovery, access to the data, understanding the data, typical data challenges that companies have, and combining that with the global data and workforce, as I mentioned, all the different data sources, the different countries, and having the distributed nature of our teams where the people doing machine learning are in North America and Europe and in India. And so that poses additional challenges when you combine that with legal and regulatory challenges of where you can have the data, GDPR kind of concerns, and not just obviously GDPR, but there's plenty of other regulations and laws coming up around the world, including CCPA in California and BIPA coming out of Illinois, and having to deal with all these different legal and regulatory challenges as part of our data management has also been a challenge. And from a productivity perspective, some of the consequences of that have to do with duplicated work, because teams, these distributed teams don't have the discovery and access that we're hoping that they would be able to have. There's a lot of duplication, people doing the same, say, feature calculations or data set generation that obviously would or could be resolved if we had a way to make this information much more available. And as I mentioned, the compliance aspect is also a big challenge there as well. So, what we've got today in our current pre-DataHub setup is we're an AWS shop, and we have data centers in we use 3 different regions within AWS, the US, EU, and Singapore region. And our homegrown data set management tool and user interface that's built on Athena, and our data is primarily in S3. As I mentioned, with doing identity verification and things like that, there's a lot of images, a lot of image and video data that we have. And so all of that's stored in S3, for example. So on top of the homegrown service, we don't have any kind of single sign-on related to that. And along with that, very basic role-based access control. The search is pretty simplistic. We don't have something like an Elasticsearch or similar search engine. It's just sort of your typical database queries. And the metadata is also just limited to data sets. So you can search for data sets, but there's no other kind of data, whether that's models or model features, jobs, all of the other kinds of metadata, and obviously none of the related linking that you might be able to get. And on top of that, essentially no governance other than, who can log in and work with the data sets. So what did we do? Well, obviously we started this effort to address this as part of a larger data initiative that I launched in, it's probably a year and a half ago now, more broadly than just, hey, we need a data catalog. It was more of an overall strategic initiative, including data mesh. But within the data mesh idea, you have discovery, and discovery was one of the things that was a big gap. So we started looking around at different open source and commercial products, and we had a bunch of different factors that we were looking at. And of course, then what did we do? We ended up picking DataHub. So you also see Acryl Data on the bottom there. We, as I'll mention in a little bit, we did actually look at the managed DataHub as well. So yes, DataHub was our choice. And so how did we end up doing that? We have decided for the time being to use the open source DataHub and deploy it ourselves. One of the choices that we made was to use the out-of-box Helm charts without any modifications. This had a couple consequences, one of which is we are using EKS, even though a lot of our other services are, or most of our services actually now in production are using ECS. But we do have some Kubernetes use cases or usage in Jumio. And given that the DataHub deployment was already all working with EKS, we didn't want to take the additional effort to go and try and figure out how to get this working with ECS. It might have been easy, but we didn't want to go and give that a try, given the staffing and resources and time that we were trying to do. And we also wanted to do serverless, so we chose EKS Fargate. This had some interesting knock-on consequences for us. So we use Datadog for logging with the out-of-box Helm charts without changing them. We couldn't add Datadog sidecar, for example. So we ended up looking at and using a thing called kubemod, which allows you to sort of more dynamically do some deployment of in this case sidecars, which is what we did, so we could continue to use the out-of-box Helm charts. And as I mentioned, one of the big things that we didn't have in our prior solution was single sign-on. Jumio uses Okta for its single sign-on service, and we've integrated DataHub with our corporate Okta. This is all deployed in the E region. This is something that Jumio has done in general for most of its data related stuff, is that we, for sort of as an easy way to deal with data locality requirements, we just keep everything or move everything into the EU if it's not generated there. But all of the existing stuff in the other regions in the US and Singapore, what we wanted to do obviously is have a single repository for everybody to do discovery, as opposed to the current situation where if somebody wanted to find the data set, they would have to log in. If they didn't know which region their data set was in, they would have to log into potentially 3 different locations to find their data set. Or if they needed data from all regions, they would have to go to every region. So what we've done is that existing metadata service publishes to SNS, and we're listening to that from an SQSQ in the EU, gathering all of that metadata. And because the metadata is obviously our own format in our existing service, we built what we're calling an adapter service, which basically is a Spring Boot application running in the EU in EKS that takes the metadata and transforms it into the DataHub format using the Java client and pushes that into DataHub. And so that is how we've deployed it. And while it's not quite in production yet, we're in the final stages of testing, and everything is syncing correctly. And basically, we just have to do our final bit of testing and backfilling of all of the existing data sets that are out there in the other regions. And then we'll be actually deploying it to all of Jumio. So speaking of deployment then and adoption, we are intending to open it up to all of Jumio. We've had a lot of situations, and I've been in meetings where people have asked, well, what's, this particular field or data about? And I would have side conversations with colleagues on Slack, like, well, if we had our data catalog, if we had our discovery service deployed, this product manager or the support person wouldn't need to ask that question. They could just go and find out for themselves. But our initial target users are the data scientists and ML engineers within Jumio, because we are initially just deploying to get the data set information into DataHub, because again, that's the only metadata management that we have. But we have a lot of tools, as I was alluding to earlier, diverse tool chains. We use things like Databricks and Airflow and SageMaker, and getting all of that data into DataHub is where we're going. So some of the enhancements that we're looking for is actually exactly what Shirshanka was mentioning earlier around schemas, and that was key for us because we have some use cases where we're interested in the schema and not so much about the data sets. And so, for example, we have, as part of that KYX platform that I was mentioning, there's a rule engine, and a typical business rule engine. If some of you might be familiar, they have data models that need to be defined. A fact model, facts are the lingo for the rule engine in terms of the data. So these fact models are backed by schemas today. They're actually JSON schemas. And the team that is using those is just sort of built their own little storage mechanism in S3 to load these schemas. But obviously, it would be nice if they could put those into this common service that we're deploying, built on DataHub, and being able to just save and retrieve these schemas to be able to have the rule engine, for example, know what the data is that's coming in. So having the schemas as a first-class entity is going to be great, and the schema registry support, where we can then also leverage that with other services that know about Confluent Schema Registry. That'll be another great thing. One thing that recently came up as we were deploying is roles associated with groups. I submitted a feature request for that just recently. Actually, it's not a showstopper, but it would certainly help us in terms of managing the security model. So the final thing too that we were looking for, I mentioned at the beginning that the initiative started out as far as looking for metadata service was around data mesh. And so I had started a discussion around DataHub supporting this notion of data products. And actually, Maggie went in and created this Slack channel, and there's been some good discussion on that. And that's an ongoing discussion. It's going to be interesting to see where that goes. But for Jumio, that's still a roadmap item. It's sort of slow rolled due to a variety of situations. But where are we going from here? So as I said, we need that schema repository. The data that we have is relatively poor around schemas. It hasn't been a focus at Jumio for a variety of reasons. And so just getting people to create schemas and have that documentation and field level metadata, being able to specify things as PII and having that strongly typed information. While we have the data sets today, the schema metadata information that we have doesn't include documentation, or certainly not field level documentation. We do know which fields are PII, but we don't have things like, is this biometric data versus, just address data or something like that. So just the expanding on schemas is really what the focus is going to be at Jumio and use of DataHub in the near term. But then obviously starting to integrate other metadata is the other top priority. As I mentioned, we're using SageMaker and Airflow and Databricks and several other tools, Colina for model testing. So that last bullet about data and analytics test automation, it's one thing, on the data side and integration with things like Great Expectations. But on the model testing side, there are tools out there, as I mentioned, like Colina, which is one of the tools that we're using. Getting all of that metadata with the lineage and governance around that is going to be key. And finally, hopefully, we'll be able to actually switch to manage DataHub from Acryl and not have to deal with all of this metadata, all of this infrastructure ourselves. We did do a POC with Acryl last fall, and everything went well. It was more of a business level issue that kicked that can down the road, and we had been doing a parallel effort to stand up the infrastructure at the same time, just in case the can was kicked down the road as it happened. And so one of the things that I'm still looking for is ultimately to switch to the managed data hub down the road. And so that's really all I had, given trying to keep within a time frame here. And so here's some contact information if you want to reach out. I'm happy to discuss any of this, obviously on the DataHub Slack, but feel free to reach out with anything else. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Ray. All right, folks, so we are running a little bit short on time, so we're going to make a little bit of changes, some game time decisions in our agenda here. So we're going to have John go next to talk about some advanced data debugging within DataHub. We'll have Brittanie give the sneak peek of some of our upcoming changes to search and browse. And then we have 2 pre-recorded sessions that instead of playing them live here, I'm going to post them in Slack. So John, let's go ahead and hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Maggie. And thank you, Ray, for the detailed overview. I think it's pretty interesting how you guys are using DataHub for distributed data sets. I think that's one of the strengths of DataHub is that you can kind of bring in data from all over using that push-based model, as opposed to having some central thing going out and fetching all those things. So really interesting to hear about how you're using it. And I'm excited to hear more about the feedback you guys get once you roll it out. But for my session, I'm going to try to keep it relatively quick. It's quite a few slides, but we're going to be talking about debugging data issues with DataHub. And so first we're going to talk about sort of, what's the ecosystem look like for most companies? Why do these issues happen in the first place? And then we're going to go through a few different common types of issues we see and how you can actually start to triage or debug them through DataHub. All right, first, before we get started, I'll take a second just to define what I mean by data debugging. What I mean is the process of identifying and addressing errors in data. And we'll talk about what types of errors we can see. But most often this is, the expectations of a data consumer not being met for one of a few reasons. So pretty much, identifying what's wrong, why it's wrong, and then how to actually fix it or make it right. Cool. So let's take a look at the context at the stage. So, who are the key players in your data ecosystem? Well, most often we break them into 2 logical rules: data producers and data consumers. And obviously there are data consumers that can be data producers as well, but we break them down in this way. And inside of an organization, you'll often have data producers like applications engineers, so folks who are building online services, data engineers, people who are building derived data sets, and then maybe even third parties. So apps like Facebook or Segment, which are taking their third-party data and pulling it onto your ecosystem periodically. And then we have data consumers, people like data or AI engineers or scientists, business analysts who are using data to make decisions in dashboards, and then finally, actually decision makers who are at the end of the road, looking at some data and making some decision based on it. And let's take a look at the data ecosystem pattern that we see most often at most organizations. So most often we have, an online service or application. Let's say like in an e-commerce site, you would have, purchases and products being served online. And typically these applications are going to be generating 2 types of data. One is like a dimension type of data. So this is what we call snapshots. Things like, what are all the products on the site, or who has profiles on our site? And the second type would be events. So, things that are important that have happened. So perhaps a login event or a purchase event. And typically we'll take that data, which is generated from those applications, and we'll periodically pull it into an offline data lake or data warehouse. And these become source data sets for other analytics and products use cases. So we basically take those and we start to generate derived data. And oftentimes you'll have this sort of loop where you have source tables being processed by pipelines, which are managed by data engineers or data scientists, which create more derived data, which get put back onto the lake or the warehouse, sort of in this loop pattern. And then finally, we have downstream analytics or products use cases. So for example, dashboards, maybe for making decisions internally, or even products. So like recommendations, if you're thinking about something like Netflix or Amazon. And why are we even doing all of this? Why go through all this trouble? Well, it's because at the end of the day, someone's going to be making decisions based on the data we're producing, right? So we're enriching data, we're adding value to it so that some operator, whether it's an internal person, like a CEO looking at a dashboard, or a user of our product, can make some decision. So this is kind of the data ecosystem, data transformation landscape that we see at most companies at a high level. Now, with that in mind, let's take a look at what could go wrong in an ecosystem like this. And we're going to imagine that we're the owner of a table called product purchases. And that table is derived by joining the products table on Snowflake with a purchases event table on Snowflake. And maybe it's joined in this way. So we're running this statement every single day where we're inserting into our product purchases table by selecting from the purchases events table, and we're joining it with the products table. So you can imagine we're creating like an enriched table called product purchases. So we own this. All right, now what are the things that can go wrong on a day-to-day basis if we're trying to generate this data every single day? Well, the first thing is we can have unexpected schema changes in the data that we depend on. So those upstream tables. So the first type or first example I'll give is a column removal. So let's imagine that the upstream products table has an alter table statement made on it, right? So let's say that there was an alter table statement where the description column was dropped. This is pretty significant, so it's actually not maybe all that common. Maybe something that's more common is a column name change. Let's imagine that the upstream product table has a name change where the description column is renamed to edited description. Now, there's other types of schema changes that we may see, like column type changes. You can imagine a big int column going to an int column in a lossy fashion, something like this. But in most cases, this is the type of thing we'll see. And now let's talk about how we would detect an issue like this as the owner of that downstream table. Well, we'd probably run some query to produce our downstream table. And when we tried to select the description column, we would get an error. So actually, the query engine would catch this for us, right, at query time, before the impact of that change really gets to spread to any of the downstream use cases that are depending on our data. So it's actually kind of a nice property. Once we know that we've had an unexpected schema change, how can we begin to debug it? And this is where I think DataHub can help. There's kind of two features that can help us here. One is lineage, and the second is a feature called schema version history. And I'm going to illustrate the point by jumping over to my DataHub where I've got this exact architecture set up. So I've got my table here, and I've got some input tables. And you can imagine that my query failed today. Now, how would I go about debugging it? Well, maybe I would look at the upstream purchases table. And what I'd be able to see if I go to that page is I'd be able to see the schema history. Actually, rather, sorry, the products table is the one that changed here. Oops. So if I go to the schema tab, I'll be able to see immediately that there's this edited description column. And maybe that doesn't look familiar. Maybe it's why my SQL statement is breaking. What I can do is I can actually open up this column history and begin to see that, this edited description column was just added. Actually, it was just added 14 hours ago. This is a bit fishy. What I can do is dig a little bit deeper, and I can see that the previous version of the schema had a description column. So this is recently changed. So this is one way that we can try to understand what's gone wrong when our query fails because of an unexpected schema change. This also applies to cases like a column type change, of course. So the second type of issue that we would see is maybe delayed data. So it's a little bit different problem. You can imagine that that purchases table that we depend on is updated every single day. And on March 18th, March 19th, March 20th, everything is good. But on March 21st, the data doesn't appear. So maybe there was a scalability issue or a bug was introduced in the upstream application, which prevented that data from being ETL'd properly on the 21st. So what can we do to detect a case like this? Well, let's revisit the SQL query that we're using to generate our data. So one thing you'll notice right off the bat is that this query won't necessarily fail like the previous would, right? It'll just generate 0 rows. And this is a bit trickier of a case, right? Because now at this point, we're not catching it early. In fact, we may not even notice that anything is wrong. So what are our options to detect this more proactively, maybe? Well, maybe we can pre-validate the input. So maybe we'll run a check that says, hey, if there's no rows from the 21st in our upstream table, then maybe we shouldn't run at all. Or maybe we'll do the opposite, we'll post-validate. So once we generate some rows, we'll make sure that there's greater than 0 rows. But you can imagine the issue with this. There may actually be valid cases where there aren't any rows produced. Maybe there were no purchases on the 21st. So it's not a foolproof way to protect against this. In fact, these types of issues are very difficult to catch. And option 3, which is probably the most likely, is that somebody notices the missing data, right? And they come tell us, hey, why is there no rows today? I'm looking at this dashboard and it doesn't look correct. So it's sometimes possible to catch this near query time when we're generating our data, but it's not always possible. In fact, it's actually pretty rare that it's possible. But let's imagine that someone did come tell us, hey, something looks wrong. How can we use DataHub again to begin to debug this case? Well, we can again use the lineage feature combined with 2 important DataHub features. One is called operations, which allows you to understand the changes, the inserts, the updates, the deletes that have happened on table. And incidents, which allows us to communicate that there is an issue on a data set or a table proactively. So let's actually go and check out those 2 features really quick. Okay, so the first one is the operation. So you can imagine that, I'm the owner again of this product purchases table, and the upstream purchases maybe was delayed, and someone told me, hey, this is delayed. Well, now what I can do is I can come in and I can actually see the last updated time. And I can see that the last time it was changed is 3/20. So we were missing that 3/21 date. So obviously something is a little bit wrong. I imagine that this table is going to be updated every day. So what can I do if I've detected that something is wrong? Well, maybe the best thing I can do is let my stakeholders know that something is wrong as soon as I possibly can so that I can mitigate the effects. So maybe as the owner of a table, let's say the upstream owner actually notices this first, what I can do is use this feature called incidents to basically say that this SLA was missed, right? So maybe a bug in application code caused an incident here. And the really nice thing about this feature is that once we create the incident, we will actually, basically we will actually notify you. So on Slack or on your preferred notification channel, that something has happened to an upstream dependency. So for example, if you're an owner of the downstream purchases table, you'll actually be notified when there's an incident on the upstream purchases. And similarly, you'll be notified once that issue is ultimately resolved. Awesome. Let's continue back to the slides. I know I'm going a little long. I'm going to try to speed things up a bit here. All right, so the third case, and this is probably the hardest to detect and the hardest to catch, is unexpected semantic changes to data. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's talk about the first type, which is a column semantics change. Let's imagine there's a purchased at column in the purchases events table that we depend on. And it's traditionally been in seconds, right? But the engineers that are owning the upstream application decided that milliseconds is actually the industry standard, and maybe they should have been putting milliseconds in this column all along. So they make that change, right? Now all of the downstreams have to be able to deal with that. The second case is a row semantics change. So let's imagine that the purchase event table initially or traditionally has only represented online purchases, those made from our web store. And today we made a change that actually includes mobile purchases in the purchase event table. Well, now the meaning of the purchase event row has changed to include mobile purchases. So you can see the key characteristic of this type of change is that the structure of the data didn't change. It's really the meaning of the data has changed in some way. So how do we detect cases like this? Well, it's the most difficult to detect because our query will not only run successfully, but it will produce rows. It will actually run and produce data. And so, this actually will possibly lead to cascading effects where downstreams consume our data and in turn produce bad data. So what are our options to detect these cases? Well, one is maybe we could, I don't know, pre-validate the columns before we use them as the consumer, but that seems kind of expensive. Maybe we could pre-validate the row count. But again, is that really foolproof? Like, can we really know how many purchases were made yesterday? Or if there was a spike because of the holidays, can we really account for that? And the third is that, someone actually notices the strange data. Again, this is most likely what happens today. This is very rarely possible to catch at query time, but it can be very expensive if you don't catch it inversely because of the downstream effects it can have. All right, so how can we, if we know something has gone wrong, let's say we know that the data looks weird, how can we detect that there was an unexpected semantic change using DataHub? Well, you'll notice a theme here. We can use the combination of lineage and two other key features of DataHub, the data profiles feature and the assertions feature, if we're lucky, to debug these types of changes. So one final hop over to DataHub. So you can imagine that we know something's wrong with our downstream table of the purchases table. Maybe what we can do is we can come to actually look at the profile of this data. And maybe we look at the column purchase at date. This is the one that's been changed. And nothing looks particularly weird with the sample values. So we go over to the history. And if we look at this, we can actually see that the values have changed quite dramatically. In fact, they've changed by a factor of 1,000. So that's one thing we can do. We can also look at things like the row count over time. We can see that maybe some new events are coming in. Maybe this is caused by that mobile purchase event being added. All right. And if we're really lucky, our upstream data owner will be super responsible, and they will have defined some tests. This is what we call assertions in DataHub. And we can see that there was an assertion defined on that purchase stat column, which basically enforces that it's in seconds, and previously it's good, and now it's bad. So this is less common. This is the ideal state, is that every data producer is responsible and able to write tests for their data that we can immediately go inspect when something's wrong. All right. That's pretty much all the changes I wanted to talk about. But before we end, I want to talk about a few features we're working on that will enable, not just layer-to-layer debugging like what I showed here, but actually end-to-end debugging of data issues and flagging data quality issues across the lineage graph. And the first feature we've rolled out on this track is the DataHub Chrome extension. And what this allows you to do is it allows people who are looking at charts or dashboards in their BI tools to understand whether the lineage graph is healthy. So whether the inputs that produce that dashboard or chart can be trusted. So I'm going to do one final demo over here by pulling up our Looker account. And you can imagine we have an adoption report dashboard. What you'll notice is that we have this little data insights panel over here, which is provided by the DataHub Chrome extension. And when we click it, what this will do is it'll basically cross-reference the dashboard with the information in DataHub, and it will use the lineage graph to tell you that there's something wrong with an input table, which is used to produce the adoptions dashboard. And so we can see that there's one table upstream of this that has failing assertions. From here, we can actually go in and we can see that it's failing assertions, and we can begin to triage that problem using DataHub. So I'm really excited about this particular feature set or roadmap track within DataHub. And there's one thing that we're working on right now immediately, which will make this even better, which is the ability to search and filter across lineage for entities that are failing their tests or have active incidents. So using that incidents feature that I demoed. Stay tuned for more on this track, but really interested to share this with you guys. All right, I know I was a little bit long, but until next time, thank you.
Thank you, John. So folks, we are at time. That being said, we're going to go over our allotted time and have Brittanie give a sneak peek of some of the upcoming improvements we have to our browse and search experience. If you need to drop, that's absolutely fine. As always, we will share the full recording of this session on our YouTube channel. I'll post a link to it in Slack. And then also keep an eye on announcements in Slack, where I'm going to be posting a recording of Hagen's talk on the DataHub API guide improvements, and then also some of Chris's recent work on autocomplete in the search experience. Okay, Brittanie, take it away.
All right, guys, sorry for going over, but I'm back again for a sneak peek for the second month in a row. I'm Brittanie, product designer at Acryl, and we're gonna talk about some small changes that'll hopefully make a big impact for your users to find the data that they're looking for with updating our search filters. So why are we focusing on this? We've heard a lot of feedback. What are subtypes? And then when you figure out what subtypes are, why are they so far away from types? How do I search for two platforms at once? Okay, I have a lot of terms that are the exact same, but they're in different term groups. How do I know which glossary term I want to filter on? What even is a container? It's usually not always a normal term for somebody to use. And maybe I know exactly what schema is in, but then when I go and browse for that schema, like how do I see and filter through all of the entities and tables inside of it? So we're going to tackle some of these, and then I'll give you more of a sneak peek into where we're going to make some other changes as well. So shifting over to this. So today, I actually am also going to give you a sneak peek into what Chris has pre-recorded for us. So check out his recording after this town hall that Maggie will post. But right off the bat, something that will be coming out soon is when I start searching, and I know exactly that maybe that it's in Snowflake. So before even hitting the results page, I can go ahead and add a filter there. Then you'll see some big changes right away. So today our filters are around the left-hand side. Now we've cleaned them up and really focused on, first of all, do you want to filter by platform, a domain, type, a glossary term, and added those up to the top here. For types and subtypes, we've added a parent-child visualization inside of the types filter. So if you're looking specifically for tables under data sets, that's all combined into one view now. And when you have a lot of options, you can actually start to type in and quickly find the exact filter you're looking for. As you add each type of filter, they'll be appear so you can quickly reset it. Or you can add tables and schemas, for example. You can add a lot of ands here that are not available. And then obviously, a lot of you might be using glossary terms or tags. Those are still here as well. And so here I say I want to find exactly ones that have the PII tag. And in our 65 results that we have here, there are actually only 2 tags being used. So I can do that and whittle it down to 1. A little bit more detail on this. So again, here's a quick view of each of those drop downs. If you have an environment, it'll show. If you're not making use of an environment, we won't show that as well, kind of cleaning up the UI. Being able to filter if you have a lot of options and seeing the number of results as you go. And for glossary terms, adding that container level information above it with a hover for those who might have groups upon groups upon groups of glossary terms as well. So one question you might be asking is like, well, why did you put the filters on top? Like there's a lot of filters. You have that left-hand bar. Explain that decision. That seems nuts, right? So here's even your bigger sneak peek really quickly. Some of the problems that we heard seen is maybe I know exactly the schema that I want to look under, or I like to browse through my platforms, but then I want to filter those results. So by adding the filters here on the top, on the left-hand side, we'll have your ability to quickly jump into your charts, your dashboards, your data sets, or your pipelines, jump into a specific platform, in this case, Redshift, and see, open a database and see the available schemas, and click on a schema and see your results inside of it. So in this right-hand screenshot, I'm filtering by a string, a couple of platforms, a type, and then specifically looking inside of a schema. So really quick, that's a quick sneak peek into search filter changes, and then even quicker view into what's to come with browse. So if you have any thoughts or questions, feel free to send me a message.
Thank you so much, Brittanie. And that's also the browse experience is those are our tentative designs right now. And the outcome of the discovery work that Brittanie and I have been doing. So really appreciate the feedback that we're getting from the community. And then there was a question in chat about search and browse for open source. Yes, we will be shipping both of those to open source. The new search filtering experience will come first. That should be ideally, it'll be in early to mid, well, probably mid-April. And then the new browse experience embedded with that will be a fast follow. So we're hoping, just depending on kind of level of complexity, et cetera, we're hoping that'll be in the next 6-ish to 8-ish weeks. Okay, folks, thank you so much for your attention and your time today. We really appreciate you all showing up and cheering us on as we share all of our collective successes. We will stick around for a couple minutes if there's any other questions that are live. Again, I will be sure to post a couple of the sessions that the pre-recorded sessions that we missed or we weren't able to get through today. I'll post those in Slack this afternoon. And yeah, if you're going to be in Austin, please let us know. We'd love to hang out with you. And yeah, we'll see you all in Slack. Let us know if you have any questions.